I'm sure many of y'all know this, but a good map of the area I'm talking about is on page 16 in Story, chapter 6, Europe in 1939. Okay, so um, Germany, Austria, they're combined. And then Hitler looks to Czechoslovakia, which today is two countries, the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. And so what he's arguing is that Czechoslovakia has millions of ethnic Germans. 3 million ethnic Germans live in the so-called Sudetenland, which is the western part of Czechoslovakia. And what Hitler is saying is, look, this should be German territory. More Germans live in this territory, as do Czechs or Slovaks. And I think Germany should take control over this area because it's so full of ethnic Germans. So he starts banging the drum that Germany should be handed over the Sudetenland, which is the western part of Czechoslovakia. And it looks like there's going to be a war over the question of Czechoslovakia. But what happens is that there's a very famous meeting between the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and Hitler at Munich, and the decision is made. This is in 1938. France and Germany, French officials are there too, decide to or agree to allow Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, this part of Czechoslovakia. What's infuriating about this, even in 2019, is the Czechs were in a position the Czech Slovaks were in a position to really fight Hitler. They had actually they had strong armaments industries. They had a pretty organized army, and they could have really given Hitler a pretty good fight. But instead, they're sold out by the English and the French, because the English and French are just so determined to avoid a war, and they believe Hitler's promises that he will stop there, that he's going to stop in the Sudetenland once he occupies this area of Czechoslovakia that has these 3 million ethnic Germans, that he'll stop there. Well, as I've said often, and as I'm sure you intuit, Hitler doesn't have an off button. Once the Czechs lose the Sudetenland, they can't defend the rest of the country against a German attack. And so they, not only do they lose the land, they lose a number of armaments as well to the Germans. And in March 1939, the Germans roll into Czechoslovakia and they occupied the entire country of Czechoslovakia. So this is the turning point in Europe. Now, finally, after all the appeasement, after all the looking the other way while Hitler is expanding, the British and the French realize that they have to draw a line in the sand, although they realize it a little bit too late. And it's pretty clear that the next move for Hitler is the invasion of Poland. I mean, if you look at the map, it's just the next logical place that he could go east. And the Germans, the British and the French, they say to Hitler, if you go into Poland, we're going to declare war. And what they do is they start mobilizing for war, and it's pretty clear that the war is going to happen. And it's at this point, in August of 1939, where Hitler and Stalin signed their very, very famous non-aggression pact. one of the things you want to think about the Non-Aggression Pact is it green lights Hitler's invasion of Poland. Why? Because he doesn't have to worry about the Soviet Union trying to oppose him. In fact, the Soviet Union is going to get half of Poland in the so-called secret protocol. I mean, Stalin's a monster too, right? These are two monsters. But thinking strategically, what Hitler has done, and it was incredible to the rest of the world that Stalin and Hitler would sign a non-aggression treaty. For years, you, I don't even think there's another parallel in the world today. The hatred that they'd shown of each other, um, just the rhetoric between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, and it wasn't just mere rhetoric. I mean, these are blood enemies, although the war hasn't started yet. And then suddenly, secretly, overnight, in late August 1939, the world wakes up, and Hitler and Stalin have made peace. Now, of course, we know that that peace would not last, but it just rocked the world scene, shocked everybody. Nobody saw it. It was a cynical move par excellence on the part of both Hitler and Stalin, and they both, in the short term, got what they wanted. Hitler is allowed to, in effect, invade Poland, which he does the next month in September. And when he does, Germany and France declare war on him. And then Stalin moves into the eastern part of Poland and captures that area of Poland as well. So these two enemies that hated each other and feared each other and distrusted each other for the time being make a non-aggression pact. Now, a point that the movie makes that I want to reemphasize: Stalin knew that Hitler was going to attack him at some point. What Stalin's doing, besides getting Poland, which he's happy to control, he's just trying to buy some time. He realizes that the Soviet Union, although it's industrializing at a fairly rapid rate, is behind Germany in terms of military technology, in terms of military mobilization, in terms of weaponry and that kind of a thing. And the other thing is, Stalin has just massacred, or he's just basically decapitated the Russian army because he's murdered most of the Russian generals because he's such a paranoid. He's convinced that these generals are going to lead a coup against them, and he doesn't want them to create their own power center. So Stalin has murdered his own generals, and so it's going to take a while for a new generation of military officers to rise up the ranks. Now, if you might remember, one of the generals, most importantly, that survives these purges is Zhukov, who fights at Nomonhan, actually in August of 1939. So Stalin needs to buy time. And by signing this non-aggression pact with Hitler, he buys some time. So Hitler's still on a roll. And so he invades Poland. He captures Poland very, very quickly. He moves into Denmark and Norway. He moves into, by May of 1940, he moves into Belgium and Holland and Luxembourg. And in May of 1940, Hitler captures France. He does in a couple of weeks what the German army had been unable to do in 4 years. He captures the nation of France. There's not going to be any trench warfare. Hitler reigns supreme in a very symbolic moment. He flies to France one of the few times. He only flew there once. He goes to the Eiffel Tower. Very famous, iconic picture. And so Britain stands alone. Britain stands alone. To repeat, by June of 1940, Hitler has conquered France, he's conquered the Netherlands, he's conquered Belgium, he's conquered Denmark in the west. He has captured Poland, he's captured Czechoslovakia. And the only thing that's standing between him and conquest, or victory really, is England. And as the movie makes clear, Hitler thought the war was over at this point. He thought he'd won. But what he didn't expect was the stubbornness of the British, especially Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill, well, you know what? I'll talk about Churchill in the last podcast instead of rushing through this podcast, and then I'll be done for the day.